My name is Mark Lichty, and I'm chair of ASPI, and I want to thank the Chodak Award team for their dedication to this. And the team was Howard Walensky and Paul Schellheimer, Robin Chodak, Erica Johnson from Sweden, Jim Schreit, myself, and Govinda from Canada and India. So I appreciate all of the effort that you and dedication you showed. We're here today to honor two giants who showed remarkable courage in stemming the tide of overtreatment of prostate cancer. The ASPI hears from men who have been suicidal to the devastating side effects of overtreatment. Through the work of Dr. Chodak and Dr. Klotz, that has changed. The first we honor is Dr. Gerald Chodak, who was way ahead of his time in advocating for active surveillance. Jerry was also ASPI's medical advisor and was generous and patient with his time. He also founded US2. The second to be honored today is Dr. Lawrence Klotz, who has continued that leadership in his advocacy for active surveillance. He's currently affiliated with Sunnybrook Health Science Center and a former department head and professor of surgery at the University of Toronto. He was a surgeon who was so dedicated to his patients that many years ago, he chose the patient over the knife when active surveillance was appropriate. These men risked their professional reputations in advocating for active surveillance when it was little understood and much maligned in the medical world. Many of us on this call owe a deep debt of gratitude for these two who faced adversity in furthering their vision. And Jerry was a friend of my friend, Howard Walensky. And Howard, I'm really grateful to you for suggesting this creation of this award and to your own courageous leadership in caring for men diagnosed with prostate cancer. So we'd like to hear from you.
Well, Mark, I felt like I was going to choke up thinking about Gerald Chodak. But we're here today to honor two superb physician scientists and patient advocates, Gerald Chodak and Lawrence Klotz, who put their professional careers on the line to try to help patients like us. As a young medical reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times in the early 1980s, I got to know Gerald Chodak, a flashy young urologist at the University of Chicago, a true scientist who took on the urology establishment with new ideas that would come to affect everyone in this virtual room. He was above all a man of science with an abiding curiosity and willing to advocate unpopular ideas on behalf of patient care. ASPI, Active Surveillance Patients International, and I are pleased to honor Jerry today, and of course, Dr. Klotz, who assumed the mantle and made active surveillance a reality for millions of us, sparing us from unnecessary surgery and radiation and side effects. Dr. Klotz is the first recipient of the Chodak Award. Jerry was more than a scientist. He was a true patient advocate. He saw the toll of prostate cancer and founded the US2 support group 30 years ago in Chicago, a group that has impacted many of our lives. Jerry didn't hesitate when I recruited him as the first medical advisor to ASPI back in 2018. On a personal note, Jerry was at the ready as my second and third opinion when I was diagnosed with low-risk prostate cancer in 2010. Maybe it was fate that put us together. He said, speaking about himself and me, when I get my prostate cancer, and I will, I want what you have. He put me at ease in my darkest moments. Jerry died too young from an aortic aneurysm on September 28, 2019. I wrote his obituary in mid-page. The first person I interviewed for the obit was our honoree, Dr. Klotz, who named active surveillance and himself as a hero to patients on active surveillance. He told me Jerry was his mentor. We owe a debt of gratitude to these two giants. And I think I'm becoming verklempt, but it's coming from the heart. We created the Chodak Award to honor the vision, the patient advocacy and pioneering spirit of Jerry and those who followed. The Chodak Award Committee selected Dr. Klotz from a field of worthy doctors, and he was our unanimous choice. Next up, I'm going to put Dr. Keene, who was a longtime friend of Jerry's and the third member of the gang of three. So Dr. Keene, your turn.
Thank you very much. It's an honor and a real pleasure to have been asked to partake in this. I was just asked when I met Jerry, and I think it was actually in the mid-90s that we first ran into each other rather than in the 2000s. It was at a meeting. I was a new attending, working at Emory, and this guy stood up and started arguing with the speakers. And I was extremely impressed by the way he handled himself, by the questions he asked, by the frankness with which he approached the problems. And basically, when they tried to shut him up, he wouldn't shut up, which was pretty impressive given the people who were in the room. I subsequently met him about the following evening, and we had a drink. And that was one of the beginning of many drinks that we had together, always at meetings and always enlightening. I would say that one of the things about Jerry was he was a man of all seasons. He was never afraid to take up a challenge. He was never afraid to defend himself or somebody who he felt was being unfairly treated. He also developed some wonderful meetings that he ran all over the United States, where he would have representatives such as he'd have a urologist, he'd have a medical oncologist, he'd have a radiation oncologist, and he'd have some other people up there all on the stage, and he would give case scenarios. And they turned out to be perhaps some of the most enjoyable times I've ever had, but also some of the best teaching sessions I was ever at, because you actually got real world data from real world people who were actually doing what we were talking about and what I was trying to do. And then afterwards, I would say that Jerry was also one of the best people that you could go out with at night. And it was just fun from the beginning to the end. I remember one evening, it was about 10 o'clock, and we were in Key Largo for a meeting, that was a hard place. I mean, it was a real trial of us to go down there, but it was, and of course I'm only joking, but it was a wonderful place. And Jerry, we walked into this bar and there was music playing, and Jerry started to dance. And I had never seen Jerry Chodak dance. He was without doubt one of the finest dancers I've ever seen. I did not get out of my seat because I was not going to look like a total buffoon trying to copy this. But I kid you not, the ladies lined up to dance with him. And some of them were 60 and some of them were 20. And he spent at least an hour on that dance floor. And that man could dance. That was one of my lifetime memories of him. He was also a very good tennis player. And if you played him in tennis, the thing he loved to do with me was, because I'm not very talented, but I tend to be determined. And he would run me round from side to side to side to side of that golf course. Generally, we'd be playing in Florida. And by the end of it, I needed an IV to replace some of the fluid that I'd lost in him. He was also somebody that was quick to stand up for people. And he paid a heavy price for his views. in a lot of circumstances, lesser people would have shut up and sat down, not Jerry. And when he started treating people and he started telling people that they didn't need to have radiation or didn't need to have surgery, there was a reasonably large backlash, which has now, thanks be to God, we do have a much clearer idea of who does and who does not need to be intervened with regarding prostate cancer. But he was the one who started it all, and I think he started us all thinking. And I think, you know, Laurie filled a very big gap when Jerry passed. And I was really thrilled when Laurie wrote that obituary or put it in the whichever magazine it was in. It was really extremely well written, and I was very proud of him for doing it. So that's it, really. It's an emotional time. He's sadly missed, and I do know that he was extremely happy for the last number of years in his life, and I can only contribute that to his wife. So thank you for the opportunity.
So I guess I'll take over from there. Next up will be Robin Chodak, who Tom was referring to. And here's another reference that Tom had. Jerry and Robin met tango dancing in 2006. There's an amazing picture of Jerry in full tango with Robin. They look like they're on the cover of Tango magazine. Jerry indeed was a top doctor and a top dancer. I think he was world class, and not only just world class for urologists. He was an athlete, as Tom said. He was an artist. And Robin, we'll talk a little bit more about the art part in a minute. Robin introduced the man of science to a more mystical world. They were engaged in 2008. And they waited to be married specifically on 11/11/11. And I'm not talking about the World War I armistice. I'm talking about the 2011. And that was a magic number for them. So Robin, your turn.
Wow. So it's definitely an emotional time. And I truly loved hearing the stories about my husband. You all knew him in a way that portrayed all of his wonderful qualities. And I was blessed to know Jerry since 2006. And we were together at that time. And I do want to just right now express my gratitude for this award. I am so pleased that Jerry's philosophies, his legacy, his ideas about prostate cancer are carried on. And I do want to thank you, Howard, because you came up with this idea. So thank you. And to you, Mark, you put many hours in with Howard and you made this happen today. So thank you. Thank you, ASPI. And I also want to thank Zero, because Zero will maintain the history of how us two began. And that was the brainchild of Dr. Chodak, along with his patients, to create the US2 organization. So I say thank you to Zero. And I know that you watching here today at this moment, and those in the future, many of you knew my husband longer than I have. And you have these wonderful, beautiful stories that just warm my heart. And if you knew him like I did, he was never, ever afraid to buck the system regarding anything. And in fact, he was kicked out of the University of Chicago for doing so, but that didn't stop him. I kind of think he was like Tiger Woods, you know. Tiger Woods just keeps going, and Jerry just kept going. He was, you know, oftentimes called the Energizer Bunny, and and everyone spoke about what he liked. You know, he danced, he golfed, he played tennis, he painted. He was truly, truly a Renaissance man. But I met Jerry, he was winding down his practice, but I knew he was a man of science. And he particularly cared about patient education. But what was most important to him was what was best for the patient. And many times that meant no surgery. Back then, that meant waiting and watching. And let's look at the cancer today. Thank you, Dr. Klotz, for naming it active surveillance. So this is what we have today. And this is the reason for this is our first Chodak Award. And I am honored to present it to Dr. Klotz, who knew my husband well at a personal level and at a professional level. And they share the same philosophies. So with that being said, Dr. Klotz, if you could hold up, this is a piece of glass hand blown by Jerry Chodak. And this is the award. Beautiful, and it's blue by prostate cancer. So thank you, Dr. Klotz.
Yeah, it's really the blue of prostate cancer. It's a spectacular piece of art, really, and I'm very privileged to have it. It sits in pride of place in my home, and it really is something special. So, and the workmanship is really, it's outstanding. Like, it's a perfect piece.
Yes, yes. So we are honored that you are our first recipient, and we'll have many in the future that we can carry on these same philosophies about active surveillance. And I'll let you speak, Dr. Klotz, but one thing I do want to say is that, you know, Jerry left a big impact on many lives, and what his message is and will always be is to just really embrace life, love it, always do your best, be kind. He was an amazing doctor, an amazing human being. And I just want that to continue. We all get inspiration from him and his philosophies and his life. So thank you.
Dr. Klotz, your turn.
Okay. Thank you, Howard, Robin, Mark, and others who are on the line or who will be watching this. And this really is I would say, unique and unprecedented gesture and honor. And when Howard called me and said, you know, we've given you this award, I was really I was so touched, partly my memory and debt to Jerry, and partly this is really something unique. I've been fortunate to get lots of honors, but not one like this. It represents patient appreciation. It represents the partnership between physicians and the community, and recognition of the importance of conservative management. So it's just a wonderful thing in so many ways. So I'm going to speak for a few minutes. First, just some reminiscence about Jerry, and then a kind of segue into how the whole active surveillance initiative emerged, and then something about where we're going. So I remember very clearly meeting Jerry for the first time. And this would have been probably the early 90s. And he was 5 or 6 years older than me. So at that point, I was a newly minted urologic oncologist. I'd done my fellowship at Memorial Sloan Kettering. I've been in practice a couple of years. And basically in my own mind, and pretty much everyone else's, I was a nobody. I was unknown. And I was ambitious, but the path ahead looked daunting.
And I ran into, we were at the AUA meeting. And my experience at the AUA was there was so much going on that I was not a part of. And it was frustrating. Like I could see there are these groups getting together, projects being planned, initiatives, and I wasn't involved, and it bothered me. And then I ran into Jerry, who I recognized, but hadn't really met, on a subway platform. And we were standing beside each other, kind of nodded. I introduced myself, and I was in awe of him. He was a name already. In the 5 or 6 years that he'd had ahead of me, he had established himself as one of the leading contrarian voices in prostate cancer. And we're standing on the platform, and he started to curse, and he said, "God damn it." I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "There's all these things going on that they've excluded me from." And I suddenly thought, this light went off, like, something, he feels exactly the way I do. And here he is, an established figure. This is a neurotic idea. And it was the last time I ever felt that way. And what he showed me was that basically you have to drive forward on your own. You can't put yourself in a place where you're kind of dependent on approval of the powers that be to move forward. And it was really a very powerful insight at that point. I never had really another moment of kind of angst about that whole thing subsequent to that. And then, of course, a couple of years later, he came out with a New England Journal paper. It was published in 1994. He was the first author, 828 cases of conservative management of prostate cancer. Now, the idea of treating patients conservatively wasn't that new. It was called watchful waiting, but it really had a terrible reputation. It had been adopted in Scandinavia and the United Kingdom, and they had the highest mortality rates in the world. And there was really very confused thinking, because essentially they weren't treating anybody. And of course, the patients with aggressive prostate cancer died of it without treatment. And he reported at 10 years, 87% of the patients with low-grade prostate cancer were still alive. And this article was really a bombshell. And it kind of pointed the path forward, like, we really need to start stratifying these patients, treating them differently, not a one-size-fits-all approach. I'll come back to that, but let me just say a few more things about Jerry. As a result of that meeting, we, like Tom, started hanging out together at meetings. I was a fairly committed tennis player at that point. I thought, I was not a bad player until I went out on the court with Jerry. I don't think I got one game off him. And he was an incredibly talented athlete. I am no golfer, although I like golf. I would play, at least on the tennis court, I could try and hold my own. On the golf court, I was simply slaughtered. Never really an issue. The other striking thing I remember from one of our golf games is his cell phone, or his phone, I guess it was early days, starts going off. Who is calling him? Patients. Now, this to me was a novel thing, that as a high-powered, essentially world-famous surgeon, you would give your patients your cell phone number. And I said, "Your patients have your cell phone number?" Disbelieving. And he said, "Of course, they have to get a hold of me sometimes." So, that was also kind of out of the normal, what was the kind of normal thing then, which is the doctor's relatively inaccessible. God forbid your patient should have your cell phone number and call you on the golf course. For him, this was completely normal. Jerry was a pugilist, and I think he and I shared that to some degree. So he loved the battle. He was never intimidated, and he also had, I would say, a somewhat jaundiced view of the medical establishment in urology. And he at the time, there was kind of the royalty of prostate cancer, which were guys like Pat Walsh, Bill Catalona. These guys were the giants. They were genuine giants. They made huge advances in the field, but they had a very dogmatic view that all patients diagnosed with prostate cancer must be treated or they will die. And Pat Walsh, who's a name I hope many of you are aware of, he really was the guy who developed the nerve-sparing radical prostatectomy. And he said at the time, the ideal patient for a radical prostatectomy is a patient with Gleason 6 prostate cancer, the most favorable type. Why? Because they were more likely to have a negative margin. If the patient had a positive margin, you weren't really doing them any favors. And these were very, I would say, they were intimidating individuals, partly because of their stature and partly because of their personalities. And I can remember Jerry early on taking these guys on, and it was, sparks flew. And this never bothered him in the slightest. So that was also kind of an inspiring moment for me. Jerry lived life with great intensity. There was no sense of que sera, sera with him. It was every moment really was full of passion. And that passion was often characterized, frankly, by conflict. He was a thorn in the side of a lot of people. But I think in virtually every interaction that he was involved in that involved a significant difference of opinion, time has shown that he was on the right side of history. I'll just come back a little bit to the active surveillance trajectory. So his paper was published in 1994. It was no accident. Not long after that, I went out for a kind of research lunch with two radiation oncology colleagues, probably a year after his publication. And we were aware of this problem of over-treatment, and we assigned ourselves a task to come out of this lunch with a strategy to try and reduce over-treatment. And I just should emphasize the difference between what we did and what Jerry had promulgated was that his approach was conservative management, period. And there really was kind of either you treat the patient radically or you don't treat them at all, was kind of the dichotomy of the day. So we came up with an idea which at the time didn't seem particularly original or even impactful, which was to say, we'll follow these guys. We'll see most of them have low-grade cancer. They have low PSA. We'll track the PSA. We'll repeat the biopsy. We'll treat them if they look like something's changing. And so we adopted that. It was probably no accident that it was a multidisciplinary group, me and some radiation oncology colleagues, because little kind of more open to different perspectives when you are dealing with people from different specialties. And after about 4 or 5 years, we'd accrued 250 patients. No one had died. We had our first publication. And then, frankly, all hell broke loose over the next 5 to 10 years. And it was, I had been a debater in high school and university. Most of the guys I debated with were on either the legal track or political science. I was an outlier. I did it because it was fun, but actually what it really did was it prepared me for this decade of debate and controversy and conflict. And I would be up on a podium, and Tom Keene probably saw some of these. I'd be up on a podium. The one time I had Pat Walsh on one side and Bill Catalona on the other. And it was like the two of them had pinned, one of them was pinning me down. The other was taking pot shots at me. And, I walked off the podium really on the verge of being sick to my stomach. I thought, what am I doing? These guys are so powerful. This is going to be the end of my career. And it turned out in retrospect, those were the most important defining moments of my career, because I was right and people saw that. And also, that you get a reputation for having cojones and being willing to stand up to the to these far more senior, more august and well-known individuals. And Jerry was really the inspiration for that, I would say. I saw that you could do this. You know, no one blew up your car, called your chairman to insist that you be fired, and so on. And gradually, of course, this word got around that, you know, there was a different strategy. A lot of it was patient-driven. I should also say, I think this notion of the patient support group, a lot of the credit for that goes to Jerry. The idea that, you know, patients should get together and share their experiences or form some kind of organization was very novel. And I think, as I recall, I first heard about this actually from Jerry. I think it actually, the whole thing started with him in Chicago, and of course it's become a worldwide phenomenon. So the remarkable thing in this whole story is that it started, what started out as a kind of minority opinion that was heavily criticized. You know, I remember Bill Catalona said to an audience, I was up on the podium with him, people are going to die of this disease, and the responsibility for that will be on Dr. Klotz's shoulders. Like, really quite a serious accusation. And that has not happened. And now we have one of the criticisms of the surveillance strategy was that we were reporting too early, that it takes longer for patients to get advanced disease and die. And if we just wait long enough, you'll see patients will start dying of prostate cancer. That has not happened at all. There's been no signal. And now there's over 1,000 patients who've been followed for more than 15 years with active surveillance in the various prospective series around the world. There's no cliff of mortality is manifesting itself. And really, in fact, it's the opposite. Once patients are stable for a number of years, that stability seems to become more or less a permanent thing. And, you know, the other phenomenon that everyone in this field sees is the patient with a lot of anxiety initially, who over time, as he sees that nothing is happening, and probably I may be talking about some people who are on this call, after a few years, the confidence starts to build, and they become ebullient, particularly when they go to the support group and start talking to people who've had radical prostatectomies, and they become increasingly aware of the significant quality of life effects that radical treatment has. So it's been a really extraordinary journey, which I would say Jerry started, I continued, and now we're at a completely different time when no one disputes the concept. It's widely accepted. Every guideline group that has a guideline on the management of localized prostate cancer, pretty much without exception, says active surveillance is the standard of care. It really is an extraordinary thing to have been involved in a journey that resulted in a change in the management of really hundreds of thousands, if not millions of patients around the world. And to also be recognized for that, as with this award, is really something special. So where is the field at now? Just to wrap up, it's gone from very few publications, now over 4,000 publications the last time I checked. The issue now is not to debate the principle, which is widely accepted, but the application. So how do we use MRI? How do we use biomarkers? How do we take patients at the margins? So for example, with intermediate risk cancer, many of these guys are candidates for active surveillance. How do we select them? How do we integrate all this data of imaging and biomarkers and germline variants? So for example, the patients who have inherited susceptibility to prostate cancer because of alterations in DNA repair pathways and so on, what's the implication of that for managing them on surveillance? So there's there's about 10 or 12 discrete areas in this field, all of which are full of ferment. Something called radiogenomics, to actually be able to take MRI images and derive from the pixel patterns the genetic expression of the cells in that region of the prostate. Truly kind of 21st century rocket science type of advances in this field. So it remains very, very active. Lots is happening. The thing I'm most excited about is the emergence of these dynamic risk profile biomarkers. So for example, a urine-based biomarker, that one in particular that examines urinary exosome microRNA sequences, over 400 of them, and using a urine test can say with a lot of accuracy, this patient has significant cancer or does not. So you can imagine a scenario which is really just around the corner, where instead of serial biopsies and imaging studies, the patients on surveillance will simply have a urine test every 6 months or a year that'll reassure them that, you know, they're not at risk. So that will be a much different and more attractive scenario than the current one, where patients are still subjected to periodic biopsies. And then the final thing I'll say, I'll tell one more anecdote, which was probably the single most gratifying moment of my whole career, which is saying something. I was at the ASCO meeting, and there was a session on overdiagnosis. And unbeknownst to me, it was on overdiagnosis in breast cancer, which hadn't been advertised, or I probably wouldn't have gone. But I go to this session on overdiagnosis, and someone gets up, and there's about 2,000 people in the room, and they start talking about overdiagnosis, and particularly ductal carcinoma in situ of the breast. And they start showing my data on active surveillance in prostate cancer. And they say, look, the prostate cancer people have figured this out. This is what we have to start doing for DCIS. And there I am sitting there with 2,000 breast cancer people. No one knows who I am. So I figure I have to say something. So I walk up to the mic. I say, I'm Dr. Klotz. That was my data you were showing. And, you know, thank you for that. And I got a standing ovation from the breast cancer community. And to sort of be able to not only have an impact in your own field, but in another area is something that doesn't happen too often. So again, thank you for the profound privilege of giving me this award, of the memory of Gerald Chodak, who I think of with nothing but respect and admiration. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you. That was an inspirational story, a touching story. For those patients that are watching here, may you too be inspired to have the courage that Dr. Klotz and Gerald Chodak had. We at ASPI are much about encouraging you to be empowered patients, and they were empowered doctors. So may they be a guiding light, a guiding star for you in the decisions that you make in your own journey. Because this was a wonderful, wonderful event. May we all be so honored in our own lives.
Special thanks to Robin and to Dr. Klotz.
Yeah, indeed.